Imagine walking through a bustling mall, minding your own business, when suddenly your world is turned upside down. That's exactly what happened to 67-year-old Rosalind Patterson, an elegant woman whose day took a terrifying twist when she was falsely accused of theft. What began as an ordinary shopping trip quickly became a fight for dignity and justice, as she was humiliated and dragged away by two imposing security officers. But little did they know, Rosalind's son, Marcus Patterson, a dedicated firefighter with an unyielding sense of right and wrong, was on his way. When Marcus arrives to defend his mother, he faces an unexpected revelation that shatters his world. The man responsible for his mother's mistreatment is none other than his estranged father, Lawrence Patterson, the head of mall security. Now caught between confronting the father who abandoned him and standing up for his mother, Marcus embarks on a journey to uncover a web of corruption, prejudice, and systemic injustice. As tensions rise, loyalties are tested, and Marcus battles not just to clear his mother's name, but to reconcile with the ghosts of his past. Stay tuned to witness this powerful, heart-wrenching drama that explores the depths of family bonds, the pursuit of justice, and the strength it takes to fight against a system led by the very man you once called Dad. The afternoon sun spilled through the glass ceiling of the mall, casting a warm glow over the bustling crowds. Rosalind Patterson walked slowly, her cane tapping rhythmically on the tiled floor. She paused to adjust the scarf around her neck and pushed a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear. Despite the aches in her joints, there was a lightness to her step. Today was her day, a moment to indulge in the small pleasure of shopping for herself. She moved through the aisles of the supermarket, carefully picking out her usual groceries. As she reached for her favorite tea, a young woman nearby smiled at her. "Good afternoon, ma'am." "Good afternoon, dear," Rosalind replied with a warm smile. It always touched her how polite people could be, even in a place as busy as this. Placing her tea into her basket, she made her way to the checkout. She paid for her items, carefully placing the receipt in her purse, and began her slow journey toward the exit. The air-conditioned coolness of the mall felt comforting against her skin, and she paused near a bench, taking a moment to catch her breath. "One more minute, then I'll head home," she thought, relishing the brief moment of peace. As she stood up to leave, two security officers stepped into her path, their expressions stern and unyielding. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," one of the officers said, his voice rough. Rosalind blinked up at them, surprised. "Is there a problem?" she asked, gripping her cane a bit tighter. "We have reason to believe you've taken something without paying," the second officer stated, folding his arms over his chest. He was taller than the first, his eyes narrow and accusatory. "But that's not true," Rosalind protested, her voice trembling slightly. "I paid for everything. I have the receipt right here." She fumbled with her purse, pulling out the small slip of paper with shaking hands. The first officer glanced at it dismissively, making no effort to check it. "You'll need to come with us," he insisted, reaching out to grab her arm. "No, please," Rosalind pleaded, panic rising in her chest. "This is a mistake." "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to use force," the officer threatened, his grip tightening painfully. Tears pricked Rosalind's eyes as she felt the stares of the crowd around her. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had always lived her life with integrity, always done the right thing. Why is this happening to me? In her desperation, Rosalind reached into her purse, fingers brushing against her phone. She knew she had only one option left: call her son. Marcus Patterson sat slumped in his car outside the fire station, exhaustion tugging at every muscle. He had just finished a 24-hour shift and was looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and some sleep. But as he reached for his phone to check the time, it began to vibrate. "Mom?" he answered, immediately alert. "Marcus, please." Rosalind's voice was thin, trembling with fear. "They're accusing me of something I didn't do. I'm at the mall, and they won't listen to me." Marcus's heart clenched. "Stay calm, Mom. I'm coming. I'll be there in 5 minutes." He hung up, adrenaline overriding his fatigue. Without a second thought, he slammed the car into gear and sped toward the mall, his mind racing. He'd always known his mother was strong, independent, but the fear in her voice had shaken him. "No one treats my mom like that," he thought, his jaw tightening. Determined to protect his mother, Marcus arrived at the mall, bracing himself for whatever awaited him. The moment Marcus stepped into the mall, he spotted his mother. She was being dragged toward a small, dimly lit room at the back of the store by the two officers, her face etched with fear and humiliation. Without a second thought, he pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. "Hey!" he shouted. "Let her go." The officers paused, exchanging glances. "This is none of your business," the taller one barked. "That's my mother," Marcus growled, his fists clenched at his sides. "You need to let her go now." The crowd around them murmured, sensing the tension in the air. Rosalind looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus," she whispered, relief flooding her eyes. "You heard me," Marcus said, stepping closer. "Let her go." The officers, now confronted by Marcus's commanding presence, hesitate, but their arrogance soon flares up, refusing to back down. The taller officer squared his shoulders, his eyes narrowing. "We're following procedure," he said sharply. "If you interfere, we'll have to detain you too." Marcus's jaw tightened, and he took a deep breath to steady himself. "Procedure? You didn't even check her receipt," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I'm not going anywhere until you let her go." "You think you can tell us what to do?" the officer sneered. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his firefighter badge, holding it up for everyone to see. "I don't think. I know. Now, you will release my mother, or you'll be the ones answering questions." The officer faltered, his bravado wavering, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Marcus turned to see a man approaching, his heart stopping as he recognized the face of his estranged father, Lawrence Patterson. Lawrence Patterson stepped forward, his expression hard as stone. "I asked what's going on," he repeated, looking from Marcus to Rosalind. "Dad?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, shock and anger blending into one. "You work here?" "Yes," Lawrence answered, his tone clipped. "And I'm the head of mall security. Now, can someone explain why my officers have detained this woman?" Marcus stepped forward, his body trembling with barely restrained fury. "This woman is my mother, and your officers are accusing her of theft without even checking the facts." Lawrence's eyes widened, recognition flashing across his face as he looked at Rosalind. He swallowed hard, his gaze shifting back to Marcus. "We need to discuss this in private." "Not a chance," Marcus snapped. "You've hidden from us long enough. Today, we deal with this here and now." Lawrence took a deep breath, his expression wavering between authority and something far more vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice low. "I didn't know it was you, Rosalind." "And what if it wasn't?" Marcus shot back, his voice trembling with emotion. "Would you still be sorry then?" A heavy silence settled over the crowd as father and son stared at each other, years of pain and unanswered questions hanging in the air. The confrontation with his father sets Marcus on a path of uncovering the truth about the mall's corruption and forces him to face the long-buried emotions tied to his father's abandonment. As he vows to protect his mother and expose the injustice they've suffered, Marcus guided his mother to a quiet corner of the mall, his arm firmly around her shoulders as she leaned into him for support. The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, but whispers and curious glances still lingered. Rosalind was shaking, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Marcus felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said softly, but there was an edge to his voice. "I never thought something like this would happen." Rosalind shook her head, trying to regain her composure. "It's not your fault, Marcus," she whispered, but her voice trembled. I don't understand why they treated me like that. I showed them my receipt. Why didn't they believe me?" Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his emotions in check. "Because they didn't want to believe you," he muttered. "They just wanted to make an example out of someone, and today they chose you." "But then, why was your father here?" Rosalind's question was barely audible, but it pierced through Marcus like a knife. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't know, Mom," he replied, "but I'm going to find out." Marcus feels the urgency to confront Lawrence, determined to get answers about his father's sudden involvement and the years of silence that followed his abandonment. Marcus found Lawrence in the security office, standing in front of a row of surveillance monitors. The older man didn't flinch as Marcus entered, but his posture stiffened. "What do you want, Marcus?" Lawrence asked, his tone weary. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, glaring at his father. "Answers," he snapped. "Why are you here, working as head of mall security? And why the hell did you let your men treat my mother that way?" Lawrence turned to face him, his expression tired but defiant. "I didn't know it was her," he said quietly. "That's not the point." Marcus exploded. "It shouldn't matter who she was. She's an innocent woman, and you stood by while those men humiliated her." Lawrence looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I didn't handle it well," he admitted. "But this job, it's all I have left, Marcus. After everything fell apart, this was my way of starting over." "Starting over?" Marcus's voice was filled with disbelief. "By turning a blind eye to injustice? By becoming the very thing you used to fight against?" "Things aren't as simple as you think," Lawrence replied, his voice low. "You don't understand the pressures." "Don't you dare!" Marcus cut him off, his eyes blazing. "You walked out on us, Dad. You left us to fend for ourselves. You don't get to play the victim now." Marcus storms out of the office, more determined than ever to protect his mother, but burdened by the realization that his father might be more than just another obstacle. Back at Rosalind's home, Marcus gently set down his mother's shopping bags on the kitchen counter. "We need to report this," he said, pacing back and forth. "The way they treated you wasn't just wrong, it was illegal." Rosalind sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "Marcus, what good will it do?" she murmured. "They won't listen to us. They never do." "That's not true," Marcus insisted, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. "We have to try, Mom. You deserve justice." Tears welled up in Rosalind's eyes, but she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "But promise me you won't let this consume you. I've seen what anger can do to a person." "I promise," Marcus replied, though he felt the anger already boiling within him. "Let's go to the police station." The two made their way to the local precinct, where they were met with an indifferent officer at the front desk. "You want to file a complaint?" he asked, barely looking up from his computer. "Against mall security?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly, placing the written report in front of him. "My mother was wrongfully detained and harassed." The officer glanced at the report, his expression unreadable. "We'll look into it," he said dismissively, sliding the paper aside. "That's it?" Marcus demanded. "You're just going to brush us off?" "We'll investigate it," the officer repeated, already turning back to his computer. "Come on, Mom," Marcus muttered, guiding her toward the door. "We'll find another way." Marcus's frustration with the police reinforces his resolve to uncover the truth himself, driving him to dig deeper into the mall's practices. Marcus spent the next few days researching the mall's security force, combing through online forums and news articles. He discovered a disturbing pattern: multiple incidents where minority shoppers had been harassed, detained, or accused of theft, only for the cases to be quietly dropped. It was clear the mall had a problem, and they were trying to keep it hidden. One evening, he sat down with his mother, showing her the evidence he'd gathered. "They've done this before, Mom," he said, his voice tight with anger. "And they've gotten away with it." Rosalind shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "How can they keep doing this to people?" "Because no one's ever fought back," Marcus replied. "But we will." Armed with this new information, Marcus decides to confront Lawrence again, convinced his father must know more than he's letting on. Marcus found Lawrence in the mall's break room, his father sitting alone, nursing a cup of coffee. "We need to talk," Marcus said, shutting the door behind him. "What now?" Lawrence sighed, not looking up. "You knew this was happening," Marcus accused, tossing the stack of papers onto the table. "All of it. The harassment, the wrongful detentions. You knew." Lawrence's eyes flickered over the documents, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know the extent." "Don't lie to me." Marcus's voice shook with rage. "You're supposed to protect people, but you're letting this happen under your watch." Lawrence rubbed his temples, looking older than Marcus had ever seen him. You think it's that easy? There are people above me, Marcus. People with power, and if I push too hard, I'll lose everything. Maybe you deserve to, Marcus shot back. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let you drag Mom and everyone else down with you. Lawrence's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Marcus saw the man he used to admire, beaten down by the world. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. I want you to help me, Marcus replied, his voice softer now. Help me expose this. Do the right thing, for once. Lawrence's hesitant admission of the larger corruption within the mall's management piques Marcus's interest, leading him to dig deeper into the conspiracy. As Marcus left the break room, a voice called out to him. Hey, wait. He turned to see a young security officer jogging toward him. I overheard what you were saying, the officer, Ethan Garcia, said, glancing around nervously. You're right. It's happening, and I've seen it. But if I speak up, I'll lose my job. Then why tell me? Marcus asked, studying him closely. Because it's wrong, Ethan said, his voice shaking. And I'm tired of looking the other way. Marcus nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Then help me. We can stop this together. Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. All right, but if we're going to do this, we need more than just words. This new alliance sets Marcus on a path to expose the corruption, but it also draws him deeper into a dangerous web of deception and power. Marcus and Ethan sat in a dimly lit coffee shop, their laptops open and files spread across the table. You're sure about this? Marcus asked, looking up from the documents. If we go through with this, there's no turning back. Ethan nodded, his eyes steely with resolve. I've seen too much to stay silent, he replied. We need to get proof that they've been targeting people like your mother. Marcus took a deep breath. All right, we start with the footage. If we can find even a single video showing unjust treatment, we'll have a case. Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice. There's a backdoor into the mall surveillance system. It's risky, but I can get us access to the restricted areas. That's a start, Marcus agreed. But we need more. Internal reports, logs, anything that shows a pattern. As they worked, Rosalind joined them, carrying a tray of coffee. I brought you two something to keep you going, she said with a soft smile. She looked at the stacks of papers and paused, a shadow crossing her face. Are you sure this is the right path, Marcus? It's the only path, Mom, Marcus said gently. We need to show them that they can't treat people this way. With evidence mounting and Rosalind offering her support, Marcus decides it's time to confront mall management, but he knows they won't go down without a fight. Marcus and Rosalind stood in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, facing the mall's upper management. Ethan, seated beside them, handed out copies of the evidence they'd gathered so far. These documents show repeated incidents of discriminatory behavior by your security personnel, Marcus stated firmly. And we demand that action be taken. The CEO, a man in his late 50s with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze, barely glanced at the papers. This is all circumstantial, he said dismissively. Your mother's age and health make her account unreliable. How dare you? Rosalind whispered, her voice tinged with hurt and anger. You think my age diminishes the truth? Marcus's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. You have a responsibility to ensure that your establishment is a safe place for everyone, he insisted. This evidence suggests otherwise. The CEO leaned back, smiling coldly. We'll conduct an internal review, he said. But until then, you have no proof. Realizing they need undeniable evidence that can't be ignored, Ethan suggests accessing the mall's internal surveillance system. Ethan and Marcus stood outside the mall late at night, the building looming ominously in the darkness. Are you sure you want to do this? Ethan asked, glancing around nervously. We have no choice, Marcus replied, determination etched into his features. They slipped into the mall through an employee entrance, moving quickly and quietly toward the security office. Once inside, Ethan connected his laptop to the system, bypassing the security protocols. We're in, he whispered. Marcus watched as hours of footage flashed across the screen. Stop, Marcus said suddenly. He pointed to a clip showing two officers detaining a young black teenager for acting suspiciously. The boy had done nothing wrong, Yet they treated him like a criminal. This is what we need. As they continued searching, they stumbled upon something even more damning. Footage of Lawrence instructing officers to target certain types of shoppers. Marcus stared at the screen, his heart sinking. "My own father," he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. This discovery shakes Marcus, who confronts the painful reality that his father might be more deeply involved than he thought. Back at home, Marcus played the footage for his mother. Rosalind watched in silence, her face growing paler with every passing second. "I can't believe he would do this," she whispered. "Your father. He used to stand up for people. Maybe that man doesn't exist anymore," Marcus said bitterly. "But we're going to stop him." Rosalind shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never thought he'd fall this far," she murmured. "I still remember the man who fought for what was right, who loved us." Marcus took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll get through this, Mom. I promise." Driven by a mix of anger and sorrow, Marcus decides to confront Lawrence one final time, determined to understand his father's true motivations. Marcus found Lawrence in his office the next day. "We need to talk," he said, slamming the footage onto the desk. "What is this?" Lawrence stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. "It's complicated, Marcus," he finally said. "Complicated?" Marcus snapped. "You're telling your officers to target innocent people. How can you justify that?" Lawrence sighed deeply. "I was trying to keep my job. They gave me an ultimatum. Enforce these policies or lose everything. So you chose power over doing what's right," Marcus said coldly. "You've become the very thing you once fought against." "Maybe I have," Lawrence admitted, his voice barely a whisper, "but I can't change the past." "No," Marcus agreed, "but you can change what happens next." Lawrence, feeling the weight of his son's disappointment, makes a choice that will impact the course of their fight. Later that night, Lawrence showed up at Marcus's door, holding a stack of documents. "These are internal records," he said, handing them over. "It's everything you need to expose the mall's discriminatory practices." Marcus stared at his father, stunned. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can't live with myself anymore," Lawrence replied, his voice raw with emotion. "And because you're right. I need to make this right." Marcus nodded, taking the documents. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For once, you're doing the right thing." Lawrence gave a sad smile. "I just hope it's not too late." With Lawrence's documents in hand, Marcus and Rosalind now have enough to take down the mall's management, but they're about to face retaliation from those who want to keep their secrets buried. The morning sun spilled across the kitchen table as Marcus, Rosalind, and Ethan gathered around the laptop. The screen displayed the headline, "Local Mall Under Investigation for Discriminatory Practices." News anchors discussed the story, their voices barely audible over Rosalind's anxious heartbeat. "It's out there now," Marcus said, exhaling. "There's no turning back." Rosalind bit her lip, nerves bubbling within her. "What happens next?" "Now we wait," Ethan replied, his expression serious. "The media will force the mall's management to respond." Hours later, the phone rang. Marcus picked it up and heard an unfamiliar voice. "Mr. Patterson? This is Sarah Jenkins from Channel 9 News. We'd like to interview you about your experience at the mall." Marcus glanced at his mother, who nodded. "Sure," he replied, his resolve hardening. "I'll be there." As the story gains traction, Marcus receives a threatening message, reminding him that the fight is far from over. After the interview, Marcus returned home to find a handwritten note slipped under his door. "Drop this, or you'll regret it." His heart skipped a beat. He showed the note to Rosalind, whose face went pale. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We keep going," Marcus said firmly, though the knot in his stomach tightened. "They're trying to scare us into silence." That night, Ethan called. "Someone's been following me," he said, voice tense. "I thought I was just being paranoid, but—" "You're not," Marcus interrupted. "Stay vigilant. We can't afford to back down now." The next morning, Rosalind found her garden destroyed, her flowers trampled, and a brick through her window. She held back tears as Marcus surveyed the damage, anger boiling within him. "We'll fix this, Mom," he promised, wrapping an arm around her. Realizing the severity of their enemies, Marcus seeks help from his firefighter colleagues, who offer support and protection. Determined to show strength, Marcus organized a rally outside the mall. His firefighter colleagues stood by his side, their uniforms symbolizing solidarity. The crowd grew, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Stop racial profiling." Marcus took the microphone. "This fight isn't just about my mother," he began, his voice echoing across the parking lot. "It's about every person who's ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin or the way they look. We won't be silent." Lawrence stood on the outskirts, watching with a mix of pride and fear. As the crowd cheered, the mall's management made an appearance. The CEO took the stage, denying all allegations. "We are a business that values diversity," he claimed, but his words were met with jeers. Marcus leaned toward Ethan. "We're getting to them," he murmured. "Now, we just need to push harder." Determined to keep the momentum, Marcus decides to confront the mall CEO directly. Marcus arranged a meeting with the CEO, stepping into the sleek office with confidence. The man didn't bother to hide his disdain. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Patterson," he said coolly. "Your practices caused it," Marcus shot back, sliding a file across the desk. "These are copies of internal complaints filed by your employees, complaints that mysteriously vanished." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he warned. "Walk away now, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." "Is that a bribe?" Marcus challenged, leaning in. "Because if it is, you're making a mistake." "It's an offer," the CEO corrected, his tone icy. "You don't have the resources to win this fight." Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "I don't need resources. I just need the truth." As Marcus walked out, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The encounter had strengthened his resolve, but he knew they were playing a dangerous game. The encounter only strengthens Marcus's resolve, but it's clear the stakes are rising. Ethan was arrested the following evening, accused of tampering with mall security footage. Marcus stormed into the police station, demanding answers. "This is a setup," he yelled, but the officers ignored him, treating him with the same indifference they had shown Rosalind weeks earlier. Frustrated, Marcus called Lawrence. "They've arrested Ethan," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to do something." Lawrence sighed heavily. "I'll see what I can do," he replied, hanging up. Hours later, Ethan was released, bruised but unbroken. "They tried to scare me," he muttered, rubbing his wrists. "But I'm not backing down." Marcus placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We're in this together," he said firmly. Lawrence steps in, using his connections to secure Ethan's release, proving to Marcus that he's willing to fight alongside him. Lawrence, Marcus, Rosalind, and Ethan stood together in a press conference, united against the corruption they faced. "This isn't just about one mall," Lawrence said into the microphone, his voice wavering but strong. "It's about a system that's failed us all." Tears glistened in Rosalind's eyes as she looked at her son and husband, finally standing side by side. "We won't be silenced," she declared, gripping Marcus's hand. The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He glanced at his father, who nodded. They were no longer enemies, but allies in a fight that had only just begun. This newfound support gives them the strength to challenge the system on a larger scale, but the cost of exposing the truth will test them like never before. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and onlookers, all eagerly awaiting the start of the hearing. Marcus, Rosalind, Lawrence, and Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table, their legal team preparing documents. The tension was palpable, but Marcus kept his eyes forward, determined not to let the crowd's scrutiny shake him. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Marcus nodded. "We've come too far to back down now." The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "We'll begin with the plaintiff's opening statement," she announced. Their lead attorney stood, delivering a compelling argument that highlighted the systemic discrimination at the mall and the pain it had caused countless individuals. As the hours passed, the mall's executives shifted uncomfortably, their confidence slowly eroding under the weight of the evidence presented. Marcus felt a surge of hope. They were finally being heard. The lawsuit's progress infuriates the mall CEO, who decides to take more aggressive actions to silence Marcus and his allies. That evening, as Marcus left the fire station, two men emerged from the shadows, fists flying before he could react. They struck him hard, one after another, and he collapsed to the ground, pain radiating through his body. "You should have kept your mouth shut," one of them growled, before delivering a final kick to Marcus's ribs. Marcus lay there, gasping for breath as they disappeared into the night. He fumbled for his phone, dialing Rosalind's number. "Mom," he whispered. "I've been attacked." Within minutes, his mother and Ethan arrived, helping him to his feet. "We need to get you to a hospital," Rosalind said, her voice trembling with fear. "No," Marcus grunted, shaking his head. "That's what they want. They want me to be afraid. We can't let them win." Tears filled Rosalind's eyes as she cradled his face. "You're so much like your father," she whispered, "too stubborn for your own good." The attack convinces Marcus that the stakes are higher than he imagined, and he realizes he must protect his mother and allies more vigilantly. As a precaution, Marcus moved Rosalind into his small apartment. They sat on the couch one evening, a soft jazz melody playing in the background. "I never told you why your father left," Rosalind said suddenly, her eyes distant. Marcus turned to her, surprised. "You don't have to." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "You deserve to know. Lawrence felt he'd failed us. He lost his job as a police officer because he refused to cover up corruption in his department. He thought we'd be better off without him." Marcus was silent, absorbing her words. "He could have stayed," he murmured. "We would have made it through together." "I know," Rosalind replied, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But he was a proud man, and he couldn't face us after everything he'd lost." Marcus reached out, taking her hand. "I'm not going to let him run this time," he vowed. "We're in this fight together." This newfound family bond strengthens their resolve, but the danger they face grows closer as the lawsuit gains traction. Ethan sat in front of his laptop, scrolling through emails when a message caught his eye. Payment confirmation. He opened it, and his eyes widened. It was a communication between the mall CEO and the chief of police, discussing payments made to overlook reports of discrimination. "Eureka!" he muttered under his breath, grabbing his phone. "Marcus, I found something. We have proof that the mall's management has been bribing the police." "Send it to our attorney," Marcus instructed, his pulse quickening. "This could be the turning point. But we need to be careful," Ethan warned. "If they find out we have this, they'll come after us harder than before." Marcus nodded, the weight of Ethan's words settling on him. "Then we make sure we hit them before they have a chance." Realizing the risk involved, Marcus decides to confront the CEO one last time, hoping to force him to admit the corruption before it's too late. Marcus arranged a private meeting with the CEO, bringing along a small recording device hidden in his jacket. They met in a dimly lit office, tension thick in the air. "You've been quite the nuisance," the CEO began, pouring himself a drink. "Why don't we settle this quietly? I'll offer you a generous amount, and you can walk away." Marcus leaned forward. "I'm not here for money. I want to know why you think it's acceptable to target innocent people just to fill your pockets." The CEO chuckled darkly. "Because, Mr. Patterson, power is the only thing that matters. And those who have it make the rules." Marcus's heart pounded. "You destroy lives just to protect your empire?" "Empires aren't built on kindness," the CEO replied. "They're built on fear and control. You think you can change that?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "No," he said quietly, "but I can destroy yours." He stood, ending the recording as he turned to leave. "You'll see the consequences of your actions soon enough." Armed with this critical evidence, Marcus prepares to make the final move to expose the corruption to the world. With the help of the civil rights organization, Marcus went live on national television. As the cameras rolled, he played the recording of his conversation with the CEO. The audience listened in stunned silence as the CEO's admission filled the airwaves. "These are the people who claim to protect us," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But in reality, they prey on the vulnerable and line their pockets with our pain. This ends today." Protests erupted outside the mall, the crowd growing louder with every passing moment. Marcus stood before them, tears in his eyes as he saw the overwhelming support. Rosalind joined him, placing a hand on his arm. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You really did it." As the police arrived to arrest the mall CEO and his associates, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The fight seems to be turning in their favor, but the backlash is swift, and their victory is far from guaranteed. The morning sun barely broke through the thick, gray clouds as Marcus stood at the edge of his driveway, staring at the threatening graffiti sprayed across his garage door. "You'll pay for this." He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of anger. But this time, there was also a twinge of fear. Ethan pulled up in his car, stepping out with a frown. "You saw it too, huh?" Marcus nodded. "They're trying to scare us." "They won't succeed," Ethan said, his tone fierce, but Marcus could see the worry in his friend's eyes. "We've come too far." "Have you heard from my mom?" Marcus asked, changing the subject. "I don't want her to see this." "She's at the community center, organizing a support group," Ethan replied, "trying to stay busy." Just then, Rosalind's neighbor, Mrs. Green, approached, wringing her hands. "Marcus, I found this letter in your mailbox," she said, handing over an envelope. "Be careful, dear." Marcus opened it, his eyes scanning the words. "If you keep pushing, we'll come for your family next." Rosalind arrived moments later, her face lined with concern. "What's happened now?" she asked, seeing Marcus's strained expression. "Nothing I can't handle," he replied, slipping the letter into his pocket. "But we need to be vigilant." Despite the fear, Marcus and Rosalind's resolve strengthens, knowing they are closer to justice than ever before. The next day, Marcus and Rosalind sat in their attorney's office, the tension thick in the air. The mall's legal team entered, led by a slick, sharp-dressed lawyer who offered a tight smile. "We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement," he began, sliding a check across the table. "If you drop the case and agree to confidentiality, this all goes away." Rosalind stared at the number, her eyes wide. "Marcus, this could cover your medical bills, my mortgage, everything." Marcus shook his head, pushing the check back. "This isn't about money, Mom," he said firmly. "It's about accountability." The lawyer's smile faded. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "This offer won't be on the table for long." "I think you're the one making a mistake," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "We're not for sale." As they left the office, Rosalind turned to her son, worry etched into every line of her face. "Marcus, I don't want to see you get hurt," she whispered. "They're dangerous." "I know," he admitted, wrapping an arm around her. "But we're stronger than they are." Marcus's refusal of the settlement forces the mall's executives to escalate their tactics, making them more desperate and dangerous. Ethan entered his apartment late that night, only to find a man in a suit waiting for him. "What the hell?" Ethan demanded, instinctively reaching for his phone. "Relax," the man said smoothly, raising his hands. "I'm just here to talk. You've been given a unique opportunity, Mr. Garcia. All you have to do is testify against Marcus. Say he coerced you into fabricating evidence, and you'll be rewarded handsomely." Ethan glared at him. "And if I refuse?" The man's smile faded. "Then we'll make sure you never work again. We'll drag your name through the mud, and no one will come to your defense." Ethan felt his heart race, fear clawing at him. But then he thought of Marcus, of everything they'd fought for, and he shook his head. "Get out," he said firmly. "I'm not betraying my friend." The man sighed, standing. "You'll regret this," he warned before leaving. Later, Ethan called Marcus, his voice shaky. "They tried to turn me against you," he confessed, "but I refused." "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "It means more than you know." Ethan's decision to reject the bribe gives Marcus hope that they will find allies even in the darkest places. The courtroom was silent as Lawrence took the stand. He cleared his throat, glancing at his family before speaking. "I was part of the problem," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I allowed the corruption to thrive because I was afraid of losing what little power I had left. But my son showed me that sometimes, You have to lose everything to do what's right. As he continued, Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. For the first time in years, he saw the man his father used to be. When Lawrence finished his testimony, the defense attorney smirked. So, you're saying you were complicit in these actions? Yes, Lawrence replied without hesitation. And I'm here to make amends. The jury was visibly moved, but as they adjourned for the day, Lawrence pulled Marcus aside. I'm proud of you, he said softly. Thank you, Marcus whispered, choking back tears. I just wish you'd been here sooner. Lawrence's courageous stand pushes the case to a critical turning point, but it also makes him a target, leading to an unexpected attack that threatens to derail everything they've worked for. That night, as Lawrence left the courthouse, he was jumped by 3 men in dark clothing. They beat him mercilessly, their fists colliding with bone as they hissed threats into his ear. This is what happens when you don't stay in line, one of them growled. Lawrence fell to the ground, gasping for air, but even as they kicked him, he refused to cry out. They left him there, bruised and bleeding, and it was hours before anyone found him. Marcus arrived at the hospital, rage and fear battling within him as he saw his father's broken form. Why? He demanded, voice trembling. Why didn't you fight back? Lawrence managed a weak smile. Because this was my penance, he rasped. But you have to finish this. Marcus squeezed his father's hand, tears blurring his vision. I will. I promise. The attack on Lawrence ignites a fire in Marcus, pushing him to make a final stand and ensure that their fight for justice doesn't end in vain. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Marcus, Rosalind, and Ethan took the stand, one by one, testifying against the mall's executives. When it was Marcus's turn, he locked eyes with the CEO, refusing to be intimidated. You targeted innocent people, Marcus said, his voice ringing through the room. You used fear to control, to profit. And today, that ends. The CEO smirked. You're just a firefighter, he sneered. What do you know about justice? More than you ever will, Marcus shot back, holding up the recording of their last meeting. As the audio played, the CEO's face paled, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge slammed her gavel, demanding silence. The evidence is clear, she declared. The defendants are found guilty on all counts. Marcus felt his legs buckle, relief washing over him as Rosalind hugged him tightly. You did it, she whispered. We did it. As the press swarmed them outside, Marcus held his mother's hand, lifting it high. This isn't just our victory, he called out. It's a victory for everyone who's ever been silenced, ignored, or mistreated. And it's only the beginning. Though the battle is won, the journey is far from over. The aftermath of the trial leaves lasting scars, and Marcus and his family must now face the challenges of rebuilding their lives in the wake of the chaos. The soft beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the hospital room as Marcus, Rosalind, and Ethan gathered around Lawrence's bed. The bruises on his face had faded, and his breathing was steady, but his body bore the scars of the attack that had almost taken his life. You know, you look worse than me after a 24-hour shift, Marcus joked, his voice thick with emotion. Lawrence chuckled weakly. I've seen better days, he admitted, reaching out to squeeze Marcus's hand. But I'm still here, and that's because of you. No, Marcus replied, his eyes meeting his father's. You're here because you chose to fight back. You made this possible. Rosalind placed a gentle kiss on Lawrence's forehead, tears glistening in her eyes. We've come so far, she whispered, but I feel like we're finally home. Marcus smiled, nodding. We're just getting started, Mom. The Patterson family, now reunited, begins the process of healing, but lingering questions about the future remain. 2 weeks later, the mall's parking lot was transformed into a celebration. Banners hung from the lampposts reading Justice for All, and We Stand Together. As Marcus stepped onto the makeshift stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Thank you, he began, his voice carrying over the sea of faces. We didn't win this fight alone. Every one of you who stood by us, who refused to let injustice go unchallenged, you are the reason we're here today. The crowd cheered, and Marcus's gaze found Rosalind standing at the front, her eyes shining with pride. This fight isn't over, he continued. There are more battles to face, more people who need our support. But today, we celebrate. As the applause died down, a young man approached the stage, his voice trembling. Mr. Patterson, you don't know me, but your story gave me the courage to speak up about my own experience with discrimination. Thank you. Marcus stepped down, pulling the man into a hug. We're in this together, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Inspired by the courage of those who come forward, Marcus decides to take his fight against injustice to a larger platform. Months later, Marcus stood in front of an audience of lawmakers and activists at a national conference on systemic injustice. He took a deep breath, the weight of his journey pressing against him, but there was also strength in the room, a sense of unity that filled him with hope. I never asked to be an advocate, Marcus began, his voice steady. But sometimes, life puts us in positions where we have to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for others. My family and I faced a system that was designed to keep us silent, to make us feel powerless. But we found strength in each other and in those who stood by us. The audience was captivated, hanging on to every word. We all have a choice, Marcus continued, to turn away when we see injustice or to stand up and say, no more. And I choose to stand. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Marcus stepped down, he felt a hand on his shoulder. You've inspired more people than you know, a conference organizer said, her eyes shining with admiration. Thank you. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of his mission settle on his shoulders. This is just the beginning, he replied. Marcus's decision to become an advocate for justice inspires Ethan, who finds his own path to make a difference. Ethan walked into Marcus's apartment one evening, a nervous energy radiating from him. I did it, he announced, holding up an acceptance letter. I've been accepted into law school. Marcus's face broke into a grin. Are you serious? That's amazing. Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. I've seen what change can look like, Marcus, and I want to be part of that. I want to fight for people the way you fought for your mom. Marcus pulled him into a hug. You've always been part of it, Ethan, but now you're going to make an even bigger impact. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for showing me what's possible. Thank you for standing by me when it wasn't easy, Marcus replied. Now go out there and show them what you're made of. As Ethan begins his new journey, Marcus and Rosalind prepare for the next chapter of their lives, with Lawrence determined to make amends for the time he lost. A month later, Lawrence stood before a packed community center, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I failed my family, he admitted. I allowed myself to become part of a system that hurt the people I love. But today, I stand before you to say that I am committed to change. He paused, his gaze finding Rosalind and Marcus in the front row. My son taught me what it means to fight for justice, to never back down in the face of adversity. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Tears streamed down Rosalind's face, and Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. As Lawrence finished, the room erupted into applause, and he stepped down, his hands trembling. Do you think it's enough? He asked Marcus quietly. It's a start, Marcus replied, pulling his father into a hug. And it's more than I ever thought I'd see. The public forgiveness allows the family to start anew, and Lawrence's actions inspire others to take responsibility for their past. The Patterson family gathered around the dining table, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air. The laughter and warmth that had been missing for so long had finally returned, and for the first time in years, they felt whole. To new beginnings, Marcus said, raising his glass. And to the people who remind us that we're never truly alone. To family, Rosalind added, her eyes shining with love as she looked at Lawrence and Marcus. And to fighting for what's right. As they clinked glasses, Marcus glanced at the framed newspaper article on the wall, the headline reading, Justice Served, a Family's Fight Against Injustice. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, knowing that their journey wasn't over, but that they would face whatever came next together. We did it, Lawrence said quietly, his voice filled with awe. We really did it. Marcus nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. And this is just the beginning, he said, feeling hope for the future for the first time in a long time. The camera panned out, capturing the family's laughter, the warmth of their home, and the strength that bound them together. The fight for justice wasn't over, but they had proven that, together, they could face anything. The Patterson family has not only changed their lives but also inspired a community, and as they move forward, they know that the fight for justice will always be worth it.